Robert Mueller's probe into Russia and the election now 1 year old, and President Trump, he's not happy about the anniversary. President Trump sarcastically marking an anniversary he definitely isn't celebrating, tweeting, "Congratulations, America. We are now into the second year of the greatest witch hunt in American history." 1 year into special counsel Robert Mueller's probe into Russian election meddling, the president has swung from
"I would love to speak because we've done nothing wrong"
to
"Why don't I just fire Mueller?"
And today at the White House briefing,
This has gone on for over a year. They found no evidence of collusion.
House leadership also calling for the end of the investigation.
I mean, we want to see this thing come to its conclusion, but again, I've always said he should be free to finish his job.
The Senate Intelligence Committee, which stands by the intelligence community's assessment, has said their investigation remains ongoing.
Russians massively intervened in our elections to the purpose of helping Mr. Trump and hurting Hillary Clinton.
And the president's FBI director.
You said at your confirmation hearing that the Russian investigation was not a witch hunt. Is that still your opinion?
Yes.
When you compare Mueller's first year to other special counsel investigations, 538 Politics found Clinton's Whitewater probe lasted 7.5 years, Reagan's Iran-Contra more than 6, and Watergate lasted more than 4 years. And then there's Rudy Giuliani, who in recent weeks, of course, has become the front man for the Trump legal team. Rudy also railing against the Mueller probe and doing so on Fox News, of course.
What is your optimal timeline for this to wrap up?
They should do it today. I mean, as soon as possible. I think that they have the facts from which they can write their report. If you're going to write a fair report, fine, write it. If you're going to write an unfair report, write it, and we will combat it. We're ready to rip it apart, and we're ready to rip them apart if that's what they want.
Rudy also saying that Bob Mueller's team notified Trump's legal team that they cannot indict a sitting president. So far, the Justice Department is not commenting, so we have to take Rudy's word for it, at least on the comment. But that doesn't mean that Trump can't get subpoenaed. Just listen to Giuliani himself from 1998. He certainly agreed with that when Bill Clinton was president.
If the president is asked to testify, subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury, and says no, not going to do it.
You got to do it. I mean, you don't have a choice.
Well, he's sending signals that he might not do it.
Well, then there is a procedure for handling that. You go before a judge, and a judge decides whether or not he has a recognizable exemption or privilege from testifying. And if a judge decides he doesn't, then you have to testify. You don't have a choice about that.
By the way, what a difference 20 years makes when looking at that clip. A few minutes ago, Rich spoke about all of this and more with former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel.
Roland, I say this every day, seemingly a little and every week, a lot to unpack here. Let's first start off with what you think Mueller knows and doesn't know, and as a former federal prosecutor, who better to ask? This blocked phone number where Donnie Jr. doesn't remember 2 phone calls, one of a 4-minute duration, another for 11-minute duration, around that meeting in Trump Towers, obviously with the Russians who supposedly came to the meeting with promises of dirt on Hillary Clinton. The numbers are blocked, but that doesn't mean they're blocked to the FBI, certainly to the phone companies. If Mueller wants to know who he called, he's got an easy way to find out, right?
Oh, yes. I'm quite certain, Richard, that one of the first things Mr. Mueller did shortly after he got a hold of Mr. Trump's tax returns was to subpoena the phone records relating to every person possibly related to this case, and that would, of course, include Mr. Trump and Donald Jr. And simply by comparing those phone records for their cell phones, you would be able to tell if Mr. Trump's cell phone is the cell phone that received the call from Donald Jr.'s phone on that day around that meeting with Ms. Veselnitskaya. So I'm sure Mr. Mueller knows who those calls were placed to.
About those suspicious banking activity and the bank transfers. Talk about why that raised flags here with not only banks but also Treasury Department here and the significance of it.
Well, it appears that there are 2 suspicious activity reports that are missing from the file. It appears also that there has been some whistleblowing activity with a whistleblower alerting the Treasury Department to these missing records. And it's hard to know really why those records are missing. It's possible, it's just possible, that Mr. Mueller and his team have made an application to court and gotten permission to remove those records from the Treasury Department's files because they contain something that is so hot they do not want them available to the public. That seems like a pretty extraordinary move. I suppose it's possible. Or another possibility is that someone went in there and in order to try to obstruct justice, removed those records. That's the second possibility. And a third is simply that someone took them out to look at and forgot to put them back, and they're sitting in someone's desk and that person's not reading the news. Who knows? It's a mystery, a very strange one, frankly.
Now, whether my next question is connected to just that or even outside of it, we've heard Benedetti, and I've learned not to discount this guy. I, like many, I think, underestimated him from the beginning, Stormy Daniels' attorney. He claims there's 2 more women, and now where the money came from for alleged hush payments, whether they came directly through Cohen or Trump put the money in his personal account and then transferred it. Follow the money trail potentially and why it's important when it comes to an investigation or, in the case of Cohen and others, a prosecution. Talk about the sourcing of the money and why that's really important.
Yeah, okay. And first, I want you to, I think everybody should keep in mind that Mr. Avenatti has brilliantly played Trump like a rusty old kazoo here. He got Trump now to file an amended financial report effectively confessing that, yes, he paid Cohen to pay off Stormy Daniels. And now Avenatti shows the card that he has 2 more of these women out there that no doubt the payments to them were left off of everybody's forms, and those are more crimes now that Trump is caught red-handed in. But the sourcing of the payments is important because the Federal Election Commission requires that accurate reports be filed every time a candidate donates to his own campaign. And if these payments were made on the eve of the election for the purpose of hushing up women who had affairs with Trump, for the purpose of ensuring Mr. Trump's election, there is a very strong argument that these are campaign contributions. And Mr. Cohen making the payments might be liable because his payments are not on those forms. And if Mr. Trump funded the payments made by Cohen, then he is not disclosing his own campaign finance donations the way that he should, and that too is a crime. And that is in fact why there's been a referral now to the Department of Justice to look into this area.
And that's a good launching point, Roland, to a conversation we saw Rudy Giuliani, who's not just a talking head now, he's part of the legal team for Donald Trump, goes on Fox News, where he's made a lot of news, and I would argue not for the betterment of his client, but he goes on Fox News and he says, among other things, one, that, hey, it doesn't matter if they sat down with the Russians, the Germans, or whoever, if they're trying to get dirt on a candidate, that's not a problem. Issue 1. Issue 2, he then says, hey, I spoke to, right. Then he says, hey, I spoke to Mueller's guys, or Mueller himself. He doesn't particularly define the person. And they said, you can't indict a president. Now, we don't know the context or even if the conversation took place on that issue, but it almost begs the issue. That's not the point right now. You know, he went on to say he can't subpoena a president, too, and we know that's not true. Even Rudy said as much back in the late 90s when Bill Clinton was facing impeachment. So my point is, Roland, parse this out, what Rudy said versus what is reality.
Okay. The first issue, give me the first one again, Richard.
The first one, that it doesn't matter where the dirt may have come from. It doesn't matter if it's an American or Russian or anywhere else.
Absolutely false. Because it does matter if it is a foreign government making effectively a donation of information to the Trump campaign. What you have here is a conspiracy between people associated with the Trump campaign and a foreign government to manipulate a domestic election. That's a far worse thing. It violates, you know, it's basically treason in a sense. Far worse than somebody like the Mercers, a domestic American, doing something like this to influence an election. We now have a foreign government acting to influence an election here in the United States, that's bad news. So that's the answer to number one. Very different than an individual doing it.
And number two is the indicting or subpoenaing a president.
Yeah. There is a big legal debate among scholars whether a sitting president can be indicted while he is in office. Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton both solicited the Department of Justice to render opinions when they were about to face indictment, saying you can't indict a sitting president. That's generally been accepted, and knowing the way that Mr. Mueller has operated, I expect him to accept that precedent. But it's an open issue. It is an open issue whether a president can be indicted. My guess is Mr. Mueller will not do that because that's not his style. It's not his style to be outside the lines and do something risky or strange or unprecedented. There's no precedent for it, so he won't do it. He'll make a referral to Congress, and it'll be up to Congress to impeach the president. And the third one was?
Subpoena. Rudy said you can't subpoena the president.
Baloney. Baloney. That was resolved in the United States against Nixon, where President Nixon tried to convince the Supreme Court that the president should not be subject to the subpoena power, and they voted 9-0 to reject that argument. So the president certainly can be subpoenaed. I expect that he will at some point after Mr. Mueller is tired of playing footsie with him over an interview, and at that point, Mr. Trump will resist the subpoena. I'm sure he will, when the Supreme Court tells him he has to comply with it, I'm sure he'll thumb his nose at them, and then we'll have a full-blown constitutional crisis.
And finally, Roland, I got less than 30 seconds. The president once again and his supporters said this is nothing but a witch hunt. This is taking forever. As a former federal prosecutor, give a context. It's been a year since the Mueller probe. A lot's actually happened. It's moving comparatively really fast compared to other federal investigations.
Boy, Richard, there are a lot of witches out there, aren't there? I mean, he's caught a lot of witches so far. The suggestion that this is a witch hunt, an empty exercise, that there's no merit to it, is nonsensical. 19 Russians or whatever it is have been indicted for meddling in our election. 4, 5, 6 people, I don't know how many, have been indicted here in our country for violations of the law. This investigation has been incredibly fruitful and is moving very quickly given the complexity of it. It's no witch hunt unless there are a lot of witches out there.
Roland, my friend, as always, thank you so much for the time.
Pleasure to speak to you, Richard.
Up next on RFL, the jockeying to become the next Attorney General of the state of New York turning into a game of musical chairs. We'll show you who's in, who's out, who's trying to cut backroom deals to get the inside track.